know your name, I swear I do. It's on the tip of my tongue. Sorry, what did you say? And I've known you for how long? Your face is so familiar, but no name comes to mind. Please, can you remind me if you'll be so kind? Staring out into space, asking God to hear my case. Trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last?
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm Lori LeBay, the host and founder of Alzheimer Speaks. For those of you that are new to our show, we are an advocacy-based company providing multiple platforms to shift our care culture from crisis to comfort around the world. And we do that through the radio show, through our blog, through our dementia chats, which are video interviews where our experts actually are living with a dementia, and our speaking and training and consulting services. So we really, our goal is to raise everyone's voice and to even the playing field and get the tips and the tools and the resources out to both families and professionals. And this all started due to my own personal journey because my mom lived with dementia for 30 years, and it was life-changing for me. And she taught me so many beautiful lessons and made me really reframe how I look at life and how I look at dementia, and I wanted to be able to share that with others. We also, at Alzheimer Speaks, help companies expand their brand footprint by leveraging our platforms and content so that they don't have to kind of redevelop the wheel. I strongly believe in collaboration. And as far as our audience goes, you guys are amazing. You are so loyal and so committed to helping spread the word of hope and resources to people around the world. It's just been incredible. You've gotten us recognized by Oprah and Maria Shriver and Dr. Oz and AARP, and that wouldn't have happened without you. And so I really encourage you to continue to share the content that we develop with your sphere, because there are people that are in your own little circles that you don't even know that are dealing with this. And this is a conversation that we need to make people feel comfortable, to have, that it's okay. And the more resources they see, the more talk they hear about it, the easier it is for them to reach out and grab a hold of information when they need it. I'd also like to invite each of you to be a guest on the show, because if you're listening, you have a story to tell too, and you have lots of insights. And no matter how new you are to this journey, your voice still needs to be heard, because we need to create more support and better services for every stage of this disease and this journey. So feel free to call in today, and that number is 323-870-4602, 323-870-4602, because we'd love to talk to you. Now, before I introduce our guest today, we're going to be talking about pain and falls and how sleep can affect dementia symptoms. I'm just going to give a shout out to a couple of organizations. One is the Roberto app, and I love this app because it measures our brain function through video games and interactions. And so many times we have symptoms that might be fixable. Maybe we're dehydrated. Maybe we're not getting enough sleep, or we haven't eaten right. Maybe we drank too much and had a little too much holiday cheer. But those things you'll be able to track with the results of playing a game. And you can go to alzheimerspeaks.com, and just on the right-hand side, you'll see a banner ad for the Roberto app, and you can get an extended trial to see if you like it. But it's a fantastic way to get a baseline and just be able to monitor yourself. And this isn't just for somebody who, a lot of times we think it's only for the elderly, or our aging population. But there are kids in junior high and high school taking these tests, and they're learning about their brain, because we just don't talk about it enough. And it's it's a driving force of our body in our life. We need to know more about it. The other organization I want to give a shout out to is Maria Shriver's Women's Alzheimer's Movement. She's just doing some great work helping push research forward regarding, why do more women get dementia than men? And you can find out more on her site, and that is the Women's Alzheimer's Movement.org, the Women's Alzheimer's Movement.org. I'm going to give one last shout out to Calendar Cards, which is the memory system, and they have been so gracious, and they've developed a memory cafe directory. So you can find if there's a gathering in your area. Memory cafes are for people with dementia and their care partners, and it really helps build that peer support, which is so often lost when dementia hits. And just go to memorycafedirectory.com. So let's get started with the show today. We are really lucky to have with us today a woman who, again, I said is going to be talking about pain and falls and sleep and how we can maybe alleviate some of these or detect these things, when they're issues. And her name is Cathy Ciolek, and she is the president of Living Well With Dementia, LLC. And she provides education and consultation to help promote the well-being and positive expectations for people with dementia. She is a doctor of physical therapy and a certified dementia practitioner and Alzheimer's disease and dementia care trainer. So welcome, Cathy. How are you holding up this holiday season?
Very good. It's always busy this time of year, but I'm really glad we were able to connect.
Well, good. Me too. Now, before we get into our line of questions, I always like to ask my guests if they've been personally touched by, their immediate, family or friends circle by dementia.
Yeah, so, my first introduction to dementia really was in the 80s when I discovered over time that my grandmother, my father's mother, was having these things happen that just didn't seem normal. So she was very fortunate. She lived with my grandfather, and they lived a couple hours away from us. But, it was just those little subtle things as you start to see the first signs of Alzheimer's dementia. We would go up, and I noticed the thing that sticks out most in my mind was she had this lovely, dried flower arrangement that sat kind of around a candle in a bowl. And she had watered the dried flowers. And that was kind of like the first thing that I really picked up as far as that's so out of the norm of her behavior pieces. The little memory loss things didn't seem to have such effect as this. It was, she had such a routine of watering the other flowers that this kind of, it seemed to make sense to her, but clearly it wasn't very sensical. And that kind of started my journey and I was pretty young. I was in high school going into college at the time. And so, we kind of started picking up on this and started helping, back in the day, like my grandfather just didn't really understand that he couldn't leave her in the car while he ran into the grocery store, and starting to try to find options for him to get some help with meals and all the things that she used to take care of, that he was having to pick up on.
Okay.
So
that's interesting when you talk about those simple things of, no, you can't leave her in the car alone. I think so many times care partners are in denial, and we've always done it like this,
Exactly.
And how did he take that when you were saying, well, no, maybe that's not the best road to go? Was he open to hearing that?
Yeah, no, he was in denial for a long time. At that point they had been married probably 50 years already, and so it was kind of, he knew what to expect from her in their normal relationship, and so. It took a while for it to really kind of sink in for him that there were changes going on. And this was like I said, in the 80s, so diagnostics were not nearly as developed as they are now. And so we were fortunate in that, I guess, he started to have some health challenges, I think, just from the stress. And so we were able to, my dad's the only child, and but we were able to find a great place for them to come live closer to us. And so we helped them move down where he had an apartment in the same kind of system that she could get, at the time, probably what would be equivalent now of assisted living. And then, and as her needs changed, he was able, but, he was still the kind of guy that was going over, every day was a three-piece suit man, and so it worked out well in that he was able to let other people help some. And so, his health was prolonged, I think, because he could, we were able to help him facilitate assistance for her.
Okay.
But yeah, it was quite the change. And we were, we chose at the time to have, when she passed away, have an autopsy done. So we could know for sure what type it was, again, because diagnostic was not, and we really didn't know what other types existed, to be perfectly honest, at the time. And it was confirmed Alzheimer's. So, it's been one of those things I've been watchful and waiting and just kind of aware of for all of my professional life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, wonderful. I want to ask you if you can explain, because, I mentioned in your introduction, about physical therapy, and that you are a doctor in that. Can you explain to people exactly what is a physical therapist? What do they do? Because I think people get it confused. There's so many different types of therapists out there, and occupational therapists and physical therapists and this and that, the other thing. I think people would find that very helpful.
Sure. Physical therapy. It's currently at a doctoral degree. So most young therapists or new therapists are coming out have a doctoral degree, and that's kind of transitioned over time. But our purpose is really a lot around mobility and movement. Is kind of the focus of the profession overall, and we certainly cover the age span. So there are PTs who work in the NICU, up through young kids in sports, and then into adulthood. And through people who are pregnant and maternity issues, and then up through, the weekend warrior kind of stages, and certainly with neurological issues, and then into aging. My specialty is in geriatrics. That's what I chose to specialize in very early in my career, and it has been the focus of pretty much my entire career. So as a board-certified geriatric specialist, I've gone and gotten extra education and attention into issues with the aging. So that's been where I do. And then we look at things like moving, how somebody's walking, a lot of things in falls. There's a whole group of people in musculoskeletal care that look at things like pain. But really what has kind of revolutionized us a bit as well is looking at things like wellness and prevention, and how can movement and exercise be used to kind of help manage chronic conditions. And that's, to me, where I kind of put dementia into the category as well, because I kind of look at it as a chronic issue. It's, and so how can we keep people moving as much as possible and engaged? Because we look at it from movement being the basis of most everything that you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, what are some of the areas that you find both, communities or facilities, whatever you want to call them, and families, what can they benefit from, outside a consultation in addressing issues that impact a person that is diagnosed with dementia?
Sure. And, it's very interesting because I think it's been overlooked within our profession for a long time. And I think there's a group that's certainly pushing for improved access to services for this population for a long time. So major payer source of Medicare, for most people's Part B or healthcare services, was really looking at things for improvement. And sometimes it's hard to show improvement in this population. But what we really do know is there's so much that we can do early on and as things progress to help keep people who have dementia moving. And so, for early in my career, back again, in the 80s and 90s, when, physical restraints were unfortunately used, and, trying to get people through people's heads that stopping people from moving is really bad. And so we want to promote movement and find what we call like the safest movement, or, to manage the risk positively and enable people to move as much as possible. So, if people are looking for a physical therapist, the other areas that we've looked at are things like pain and sleep and, the more traditional kind of orthopedic problems, certainly, and after a neurologic issue, there's things we do for exercise and mobility and balance and falls. But what, unfortunately, a lot of times, so we'll see somebody who's referred like after they've already had a fall. And there's so much we think we can do for people before the fall ever occurs. To really look at how do we create a safe environment, how do we minimize fall risk in the home if somebody's living at home, and again, when we talk about movement, how do we keep people, somebody who's been likes to go for long walks, and that is a good stress reliever and engaged activity for them. How do we try to create an environment where we can promote those long walks safely, make sure that they have a way to get home or someone to go with them, and also just that, we're going to keep them on the right path to staying functional and moving. So a lot of times the PTs who specialize in geriatrics, let's say that from a perspective, we really come at it from the view of looking at that whole person perspective, and really trying to figure out, so someone may come to us because they fractured their wrist after a fall, but we really need to get in there and look at what caused the fall in the first place, and if that's something that we can also intervene, help with the wrist or range of motion, get it moving again so you can grip things, but also what factors led to that fall that we might be able to help mitigate for any person.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So, like in a home, I would imagine. I mean, we hear a lot about getting rid of the throw rugs and the clutter and good lighting and all of those things. I would imagine come into play with trying to reduce risk in terms of falling. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Things like extension cords and and we're not. I think we're, as a group of people, we're fairly opposed to throw rugs, but if you want to keep your throw rugs, we'll let you keep them. Let's just make sure they're tacked down at the edges, and just be aware of the risk that's involved with keeping it. And like when we talk about positive risk management, if it's a risk people are okay with, then we will work around it, and have some negotiations of as far as how can we make those transitional surfaces okay? Do you have a toilet that's high enough? There's some overlap when you talk about PT and OT. There's some overlap in what each of us do, and that's okay. But PTs can also help with those sometimes challenges you might have in the bathroom or with getting dressed. Although occupational therapy will tend to do that as well.
Okay, great. Now, one other thing we had talked about, offline, it was about recognizing pain in people with dementia and why that is so important and why it is so overlooked as well. Can you talk a little bit about pain to us? And because nobody wants anyone to be in pain, and how do we help that process move forward?
So, this has been one of the most eye-opening things for me as I've really gotten into my work. So part of when I'm working with somebody who's having, some challenges as far as communications, they may not be able to tell us that they're having pain. And what's very challenging in healthcare, we're so based on using things like the numeric pain scale. Like if you've ever had a procedure and you're saying, oh, what is your pain level? Is it 1 to 10? And we assume that you have an ability to put a number to a pain level because it's very subjective, right? So what I feel is pain, you might feel at a different level. But we as providers have to be able to recognize that variation and respect what the person is feeling because I can't feel it for you. And when we have people with dementia, they can't tell us. That's one part, the communication challenge that comes from it. But there's some other parts that we believe are associated with some of the brain changes that take place in dementia. Because pain can be sensory, so like when you get a bug bite kind of thing, or, and there's different words for that. There's another kind of pain we call neuropathic. It's associated with a nerve problem. So somebody who has diabetes may have some different kind of sensory changes that cause a neuropathic pain. We also see it sometimes after stroke. So someone with vascular dementia may have an increased risk of that type of pain. And then there's a whole world of psychological pain as well, with distress and pieces. But when we look at the brain changes with somebody with dementia, there are a couple of things that seem to be prevalent that lead us to make some hypothesis, which is the best we can do without more information. And so there's an increased sensitivity in someone who has chronic pain. So anyone who has had any lifelong issues, say with arthritis or bad hip or a bad back, or those kinds of things, as somebody ages and then develops dementia, they may be more hypersensitive to pain and, again, not be able to express it to us. And then there's another piece of some of the brain changes that's where the sensation that they feel for a non-painful sense, so just like if you were rubbing your skin, may be interpreted by the brain because of the dementia as painful. So where you or I think we're not, if we're helping someone get dressed or putting them in the shower where they feel the pressure of the water, where you or I certainly think that feels good, or it is a non-painful sensation, comforting even, it may actually present to the person who has dementia as a distressing signal or a pain signal. And so when we try to look at things that, say, behavioral expressions or pieces of information that they give us when they can't find words, so something like an agitation or an irritability on a given day, I really try to look down deep and to figure out, is there a potential here that they have pain that we're not aware of? There's evidence that suggests that people who have dementia are treated less often with pain medication than people who don't have dementia. There's some research that looked at like pelvic fracture and hip fracture, and they found that people with dementia get about 50% less pain medicine than healthier adults, cognitively healthy adults. Similarly, they found oral, so people who may have challenges with their mouth care, and they found a bunch of people who are having behavioral expressions that they believe were associated with perhaps oral pain that they were not able to express. So with that, I was really able to look deep into figuring out why there are a lot of things that we see that can be like anxiety or hallucinations, disruptive behavioral expressions, or wandering that may actually be a result of pain instead of what some people call psychological symptoms of dementia, which is one of my favorite terms.
Yeah, it's interesting when you were talked about that increased sensitivity and that things change. And I know I've mentioned this before on the show, but my mom was one of those where the shower just hurt, and she would say it hurts, it hurts. And Teepa Snow was the one that said, well, we lose our fat pads as we age. And so we went from just a regular shower head that beat down to a handheld rain shower head, and then started at her feet and got her acclimated, and that made a world of difference with her. It was kind of a combination of, I think that it hurt and that it also scared her at the same time. And, but that can happen, I know, even when you touch somebody or hug somebody, what once was a normal hug might feel real tight and pressury to them, or a handshake,
yes.
Or if they're barefoot, the floor might feel different, or just even the temperature of a room can have, the sensitivity is just totally changed, or sounds. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And I think as a society, we've gotten so fast-paced that we don't read all the multi-sensory signs that are given us. We're not looking at those distressor signs, and then all of a sudden we just kind of label it a behavior when they have it's perfectly rational for them to have the type of reaction that they're having. And so, like yourself, I think you're really probably trained to zone in on a lot of that stuff, where I think, families, it's real easy to say, well, this is the way we've always done it. And, you can say that
Exactly,
with
and they're just
go ahead.
with my grandfather, yeah, and they're just unaware that this is even a possibility, right? That because none of us would want to be hurting anyone by how we're providing care. That's that's no one's intent, and so it's been really eye-opening for me to just kind of really reframe this to look down into the root cause of perhaps some of the symptoms that we're seeing, and see if pain isn't a key feature.
Yeah. Well, and I look at, like when we have a baby and a small child, we're very in tune to all the senses and what could be causing the problem. What could be causing this discomfort or this pain. But as we age, we still expect someone to just tell us. And so we really do have to educate the society and people at large, both professionals and family members, of what their experience might be like, and that it's not. We get so task oriented that we forget about how important the emotional comfort is to somebody, because we're just boom, 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 boom. Again, we've always done it this way, and so that's a big retraining. And if we can really hone in on all of that, things can go much smoother, and everybody can be a lot happier and reduce everybody's stress. Because if someone's in pain, that ripples out, and someone else might feel that pain or that angst or that stress of not being able to figure it out. Where if we just slow down and look at alternatives, and we might not always be right at what we think, but at least we're trying to figure it out, and pretty soon you will figure it out. What's causing
exactly. And whether it's a family caregiver or a professional caregiver, we tend to sometimes tune things out to either be done quickly or because we have to be task oriented. And there's times where you have to be task oriented. That there is no question. But as much as we can minimize those and take the time and really be mindful and present in our interactions with the person, and because I think with the communication challenges that we see, their only way of expressing to us if something is wrong is through a behavior expression, or some facial expressions or sound expressions certainly too, and so there's a couple of tools that are out there that can be really helpful for looking at these interactions. There's something called the Pain Ad, which is I think a really easy one to use. That really look at, some facial expressions and body positioning. Are they holding themselves different? Do they seem to get upset every time you're addressing this one shoulder or putting their arm in the sleeve? And when we can figure some of that out, we can look at either non-medical, non-medication ways, soft tissue if touch is good, those kinds of pieces, or some warm compresses as long as it's not too hot, versus or to look at a pain medication if we need to do it. Certainly, I try to avoid medications whenever we can, but there are appropriate times that we should be really looking at them.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And I think, I don't know. I just think there's so many ways we can calm things down, because a lot of times and this isn't just with dementia, but chronic illness, or it can even be a stage of life, with little kids. Oh, it's terrible twos, so we just expect that behavior at that age, and it almost becomes acceptable that this is just the way it is, because we're not looking at why are they having that reaction. And if we get to the whys, a lot of times we can get rid of those reactions that aren't comfortable for them or for anyone else. And again, but it takes us to slow down and really participate and put a little effort into figuring out that why.
Yes, and being a little bit of a detective, is a good skill to have. And there's some schools of thought like the 5 whys, because asking the question, why is this happening, and then not taking that first answer is, which is the thing. And as a professional, a lot of times we go to that first checkbox. I'm like, oh, there it is, it's the answer, and then move on. Whereas we really need to sit and delve a little bit deeper and scratch the surface a little bit more, look into the history. Have they had a long history of pain? Because the more we can stop a negative spiral, because if I get upset and you get upset and then we just upset each other, it's really not helping any of us succeed, and then it leads to a lot of wasted time, either, again, personally or professionally, of where we could have gotten things more accomplished if we had just slowed down and really looked at it in the first place.
Yeah, I so agree. Now, when you're working with a person who's falling a lot, what kind of challenges do you find that are maybe getting in the way of preventing the falls in the first place?
Yeah, so the challenge we find is with falls is that typically we call multifactorial, right? So there is rarely one precipitating factor that leads to a fall. So we look at things that are intrinsic. So somebody who has just some normal effects of aging, which sometimes people think it's pathology. There are some normal age-related changes that can occur. A lot of it, though, we think is also disuse, right? So people can get weak if they're not exercising or if they're not moving as much as they had been before, right? So our body accustoms to the amount of movement that we do. So we may find some strength loss or weakness that can also impact balance, right? So balance, again, is a multi-system kind of thing. We need sensory information. So we need information coming up from our feet, from our joints, letting us know where our body is in space, all the way up through the ability of our inner ear to tell us where our body is. Some of those changes take place in normal aging as well. But also you can, the other piece that's kind of somewhat intrinsic is all the medications. Medicine is probably, when I do a falls assessment on someone who's had a fall or a near fall, I really want to delve into those medications because that's a whole world unto itself of challenges with balance and falls. A lot of very appropriate medications, a lot of heart medications, a lot of even some pain medications also have some fall risks associated with them. And then when you get multiples of them, and other pieces that can lead to behavior pieces. So we know even some of the Alzheimer's medications that are out there have, say, a risk of insomnia. We can talk about sleep later, but if somebody's up all night and getting upset and then has a fall, that's another piece that we can kind of look at. Was that a side effect of the medication? The parts you talked about earlier were the environments, right? So the lighting and the flooring and the clutter is another piece. Is there enough space to navigate with an assistive device if they need one? What kind of footwear were they wearing? What is the floor surface? There's a whole different world of I slipped on ice a couple of years ago. So I technically had a fall in the last 6 months, which is kind of a trigger question on a lot of things. But I could directly attribute to why that happened. It was a wet floor, an icy floor. Versus I don't, if somebody who has dementia and has a fall, sometimes getting those precipitating factors is really hard. I've had a case where somebody was moving around a lot, and actually what we were really able to trace back to the issue for him was that actually we believe he was hungry, and because he was getting up at a certain time. He had a diet change for some different swallowing reasons. They put him on an altered diet. And I think the altered diet, he wasn't eating as much. And so, then he was getting weak from that. So literally we were going back a couple months into the history to try to look at what was the initial precipitating factor that led up to a series of falls. And those kind of deep dives are hard for people to do because it does take a little bit of time to really, again, peel the onion. And get through another layer of all of the component factors. But what we do know is that, the more people move, generally they can at least sustain strength and be able to navigate some of those hazards better.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Um, Now, I also wanted to talk to you about medications because that's got to come into
Hmm.
play a ton with how people react because we all react a little bit different. How can a physical therapist help families review medications, or is that an area that you don't really get involved in?
Yeah, so we all generally have taken some pharmacology courses, so we have basic understanding of what medications are, and it's considered part of our practice to do medication, at least review, to really look and particularly as it impacts some different kinds of things. So falls is again another really kind of a precipitating factor. We know, people who take antidepressants, if they take it along with 4 other medications, they're at greater risk of falls. Certainly some things like benzodiazepines, some of the depressant medications are associated with greater risk of falls. All those PMs, the Tylenol PM, the Benadryl PM, which aren't necessarily even prescription medications, but somebody who takes that is going to be a higher risk of falls, and also issues with some bladder control sometimes we can see. So part of our scope of practice is really looking at the medications and being aware of the side effects, and how they may be showing as side effects that impact our care. So,
Hmm.
one of the things that hopefully when you go to a physical therapist, at least I can swear it for you as you go to a geriatric trained physical therapist, we want to know all of your medications, both prescription and non-prescription. Because, again, I've had people taking like some of the, PM medications, whether it was a Tylenol, Benadryl, or, and really then associated with daytime falls.
Hmm.
And so this was one their doctor wouldn't necessarily know that they were taking. And so to make suggestions on and have discussions, we would never tell you to stop the medication. That's kind of not within our scope, but certainly maybe bring it to the attention of the physician who is prescribing to see is there either another class of medication that would get the same effect that the person needs, say if it's for a hypertension or a blood pressure medication. Because some of those really cause your blood pressure to drop a lot, and then when you stand up, you may what we call bottom out, and your blood pressure will fall, and then you fall. So what we're trying to look for is there, and there's different classes of medication that seem to be better, and so that would be a conversation with permission of whoever's involved that we might have with the physician to suggest a different class of medication to kind of make the situation safer.
Hmm. I know for myself, because I don't have that training, but I usually will, even just in mentioning, you can talk to your doctor, or better yet, go talk to a pharmacist that can evaluate those medications, because a lot of times the doctors don't know all the ins and outs either of the ramifications of the mixtures, and people are shocked that they can do that, and that a lot of times that's a free service offered by different companies and stuff, to have that
Absolutely.
review.
A
And
good pharmacist is worth their weight in gold to
yeah,
be
yeah,
able to really look at those. And some of the challenges, people see a lot of different doctors, right? So it may be a cardiologist who starts one medicine, and a family doctor who does another, and an orthopedist who does another. And sometimes it's the pharmacist who's really going to see all of them, or if a PT, if you're showing them to us when we start a care plan. So it's really just someone to look at it, or a good geriatrician is always wonderful at this. Just sit and look at the interplay of all of those.
yeah.
Meds.
Well, yeah, and I know a lot of times you go to the doctor and you ask for all the medications and you put them in, or they put them all in, and it's reviewed, but it still isn't. It's just not the same process. And I think we get sometimes so used to, well, I have to take these pills, but no one's looking at, they're gonna, like anything else that goes into our body, they're gonna react to different things that go into our body, and the timing in which they go into our body, and depending on how our body is functioning, it might have worked fine 2 years ago, but it's not anymore. And maybe there's a resistance, there could be all kinds of health issues and changes in our bodies. And so knowing that that's an option, I think just that educational point, like I said, people I think are just really surprised, like, it could be that easy, to look. I never thought of that. I thought this was something we just had to accept, that it was part of the process, and it doesn't. It's not always the disease that we're seeing these different reactions and these different events happen with people. Now, you had mentioned a little earlier about sleep, because that's such a key issue. I think for the most part, I think a lot of people are just sleep deprived. I've never heard so much about sleep apnea in these years, and people getting tested for sleeping, and because we've all prided ourselves on being multitaskers and not needing sleep. So what can help a person with dementia? Because a lot of times their sleep patterns get out of whack, or they have severe nightmares and hallucinations. What are some things that a person with dementia and or their care partners can do to help them get more sleep? Or better sleep.
So part of it is better sleep. Yeah, and quality sleep can be almost as important as quantity, right? So,
yep.
Because there was a study that looked at in nursing homes, which is where we can actually track data a little bit sometimes better, is about a little over a third of residents spent more than 10 hours in bed per night. So you'd be like, wow, that's great. But what they find is very little of, there's a lot of fragmentation to that, so a lot of interruptions. And there's a lot of reasons, particularly in a facility level, where you may see some challenges. About 40% of their population they found were disturbed at least 3 or 4 times a night, either by noise or light or being checked for incontinence, different kinds of issues. And all of those interruptions are just horrible for sleep patterns. There's some data looking at sleep, and you can go into all the whys of sleep is good. If you trust me that, sleeping is good, and actually being able to safely cycle through multiple cycles of sleep is really important for both physical healing as well as mental healing and mental processing. And so what they found is the most common sleep disruptors are noise. So creating a good sleep hygiene environment where typically, the bedroom is used the bed is used primarily for sleeping and or any intimate relations that may go on. It really shouldn't be a place for reading or watching TV. So really trying to promote that bed is for sleep is a good thing. Looking at consciousness, like how much noise can we monitor? So, depending on where you live, you may not have a lot of control of outside noise. That can be road noise, or but even having like a white noise machine or something that might temper any other noise disturbances is something that can be useful in helping people sleep better. Making sure the temperature is good. Again, that's very personal. How different people. I would much rather my room be cold and have lots of heavy blankets. That's a comforting thing for me. And there's actually some data on weighted blankets for reducing anxiety and promoting sleep. That is showing some data. Avoiding daytime naps. If we do need a nap, and so I'm a fan of naps at different times, but trying to limit that to about 20 minutes, no more than half an hour, so you're not getting like big long chunks of sleep during the day, because that's going to resist. People resist sleeping at night some. Making sure we address any continence needs. So if somebody, there was a facility that has made some suggestions of like minimizing the beverage dosing after a certain time. So, you have more water or more beverages with your earlier in the day meals, and then less beverages towards the evening, so that you're less likely to need to go to the bathroom at night. Again, that's very specific, and that you would want to really make sure you're getting hydrated enough. Dealing with pain was one, but also that, again, looking at activity. So how the more active people are during the day, the greater the likelihood that they will sleep better at night. So, even if it's just getting up and moving around the house a little bit more often, encouraging, we call them sit to stand, standing up from where you're sitting if that's possible, anything to kind of which also help keep people from napping quite so much sometimes during the day. Have you ever gotten to the point where you just kind of sit down and it's like, oh, it's very comfortable to just take a little rest now?
Mhm. Yeah.
So those are some of the things. The hygiene piece is there's a whole world of information on sleep hygiene now, and really, promoting the best practices at night.
Yeah, I had to laugh when some of the studies came out. I remember Dr. Rudy Tansey said, I used to pride myself on being a multitasker and only going on, 4 or 5 hours of sleep. And he's like, oh, wow. And he's like, I need to get more sleep, 8 hours, and he's changed his schedule because, the studies have shown, that's when the mind can heal, is when it's at rest.
Exactly.
And, we're burning our engine out.
And it actually heals most during the dream sleep or REM stage, which is, fascinating. And we get more REM stages in the later, so each cycle is about 2 hours of a sleep cycle. And the initial cycle of REM is really short. It's not until like the second, third, or fourth REM cycles of the night that we actually get into most of that psychological healing. And so when we don't get, if you're only going on 4 hours, you've never really get to those psychological healing phases of the sleep as much. So that's why that 7 to 8 hours is really crucial, not just for the person with dementia, but for their care partners too, because you need to be functioning on all cylinders the next day, to be a good, steady care partner for someone with dementia.
Well, that's a really good point, and I think that's one of those tough things for care partners to think about because they have so much to do. They're so responsible, and they don't tend to take care of themselves and appreciate the balance that they need, that it's not always about doing for someone else, that you have to be part of this equation as well. With that, you also brought up a point about beverage dosing, and I would imagine one of the other fall issues can just be dehydration. I know a lot of people limit themselves in drinking because they're afraid they're not going to make it to the restroom and end up in the hospital with cracked head because they've just passed out from dehydration. And do you see that?
Or rushed too quickly. Yeah, or rushed, too quickly when they do go to the bathroom. We do, and and it's so important to be properly hydrated. The thing with, kind of decreasing your amounts at night is that you would bulk more in the morning, and midday meals, and so your body has time to filter that before you go to sleep. So you wouldn't be getting up during the night necessarily to go to the bathroom. But, there's a world of great incontinence products, not my first choice, but and PTs who specialize in working with incontinence. Again, not my world so much, but we call them pelvic health PTs who are really looking at helping come up with their pelvic floor exercises. So they're assuming that somebody has incontinence. Incontinence is not a normal part of aging, and so trying to look at making sure you're taking sufficient, because actually it's really bad for the bladder to be dehydrated, and so it impacts bladder function from that perspective. So making sure you're drinking sufficient water. Some other beverages are more irritable to the bladder, and so perhaps it's not that you're drinking too little, but you're drinking the wrong stuff, perhaps sometimes, and really trying to make sure you're doing a good amount of actual water intake, as long as there's not another medical reason not to.
Yeah, can you give us examples of good intake and not so healthy, not so good for the bladder intake?
As far as which beverages? So some of the caffeine-related ones. So coffee is one, and like the kind of the sodas. Again, you're going to get some hydration from it, but they have stuff in them that is more irritating to the bladder. So water or bubbly water are typically better. Certainly alcohol is another issue that can have an impact on dehydration, because while it is a liquid, it actually does things with other chemicals in your body to dehydrate you. So really, again, fruit juices are good, but you need to be careful with the sugars. So it's a very fine line and a good place for a good dietitian to be helpful.
Okay, because I always hear too with you hear of so many people with UTIs and bladder infections and all of those types of things too. And I've always heard cranberry juice is supposed to, be a positive thing too for flushing and clearing and things.
Yes, it's one of those old wives' tales that we've never seen great evidence for it. Although there's some chemicals in cranberry that seem to acidify things, which may help kill some bacteria. Mm-hmm. The challenge with, is anyone who's diabetic really shouldn't necessarily be having lots of juice.
Mm-hmm.
So again, not my number one area in performance of a professional piece, but you're very safe with water as a rule.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that
and you can put water with
a
little lime or a little lemon.
Mhm. Okay. Just to kind of change the taste up and lemons, isn't that a dietetic to help push it through?
Oh yes. So those even cucumber water, there's all kinds of variants. So any water is really going to help flush the system that way for keeping the bowels moving too. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because and again, with that the beverage dosing at night, because I would imagine that there's probably some fairly high numbers of people falling at night just because you're a little bit more disoriented. It's dark. If people don't have, haven't maybe placed, some light sensors to guide them or night lights on in the bathroom to, be able to scoot around and stuff. And I noticed even for myself, a lot of times I'll have dinner late. When I eat dinner late, I don't sleep as well because my stomach's just working too hard, and it's not that I have to do anything, but I just don't sleep as well. And so I try hard not to do that as often as I used to. And I was amazed at the difference that I felt in terms of that. So, doctors were trying to initially kind of blame that on my hormones. And I'm like, I don't think it's my hormones. And then I changed some eating patterns, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm not having this issue. So that was kind of funny.
Yeah, your body isn't intending to process food during the night, food or beverage. So that's part of why having your last meal sufficient enough time before you go to bed to kind of get it out of your stomach first.
Yep, exactly. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation, and our hour is just about up. I'm just wondering if you maybe have a story for us in terms of maybe a conversation you've had with a person with dementia or a family member that was kind of life-changing insights for them.
Yeah, part of it is really just trying to look at the positive potential. And I think one of the challenges we see with the stigma, I think sometimes it's associated with, is that, it's all over, it's a long goodbye kind of thing. The parts where I've had is to just try to figure out what's important to the person. How can we figure out how to keep them mobile and out of pain and comfortable and engaged? And finding those connections that can really keep them doing as much as possible and living in a positive fashion. So I really try to come at it from it's not necessarily what is the loss of all of the pieces that we're addressing, but how can we, or I, if I'm coming to talk to you, figure out what are the important things and how do we navigate both time of day or functional energy or mobility to be able to keep the person engaged in what's important. So in one case, it was really, that it's hard to get out, it's hard to do things, but they were very engaged by being around the animals. So is there a way that we can use the best time of energy of the day to either go out? We tried going to a shelter to volunteer. That wasn't the best option. But then we found some other people in the neighborhood who had pets that actually could use a break during the day. And so we kind of scheduled for them and their family to go help let the dog out for a little while. And those kinds of pieces kept somebody happy and engaged. And, living at home with what we considered the best risk scenario, or the most positive risk, because life isn't risk-free, is really the perspective that I come from. I take risk every day. I get in the car, I drive, I do different things. And so how can we manage that risk? So if somebody wants to be able to continue to live at home, what situations can we set up? So, I'm trying to help people not necessarily organize their services necessarily, but do those connections that can keep someone engaged in doing what they want, and or get out to places where their caregiver can have a break and do the things that they need to do, and know that the person's going to be happy and content.
Yeah, that's great. I have a thing called Your Memory Chip, which focuses on, because I used to be really task-oriented, and I had all this stuff down that was for the other person, but I was really focusing on the task and not the person. And I realized that's not being person-centered, but yet we all kind of think it is because it's for them.
Oh, exactly.
But it's not about them. And there's a really big difference there. And so I switched my focus, and I made up this little tool that anybody can download for free called Your Memory Chip. And I taught myself to focus on, was my mom safe? Was she happy? Was she pain-free? And when I focused on that first, I found that I did my tasks differently. I found that I didn't have to do all of them. Some of them were just to keep me busy, so I felt like I was making a difference in their life, that I was, because there is no cure, there is, none of that. But it really got me back to being relationship-based. And it allowed me also to let others help, that it didn't always have to be me. And that was just like a godsend in and of itself. And so I appreciate that you brought that point up, because it really is important for us to be emotional givers, because, as the saying goes, people aren't going to remember what you did. They're going to remember how you made them feel. And that never goes away with dementia, even with somebody in the late stages. They can still take everything in. They just might not be able to respond. So it's up to us to use kind of that multi-sensory ability to read communication in a different way and in a different light. And it sounds like you've honed that down well. So kudos to you, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Now, Cathy, people can get a hold of you by your website, which is www.livingwellwithdementia.llc.com. That's livingwellwithdementia.llc.com, or they can email you at CIOLEK at livingwellwithdementia.llc.com. And then you also had listed your phone number for people to reach out, which is 302-753-9725. That's 302-753-9725. And, feel free to reach out to Cathy Ciolek and check out her website, and I'm sure she would love to see how she could help you. So thank you again, Cathy,
Absolutely.
for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really my pleasure.
Good. In wrapping up here, I'm just going to give a shout out to a couple other organizations. One is the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation, which takes a holistic approach in terms of dealing with dementia. So they're going to look at diet and exercise and meditation, and you can reach them at alzheimersprevention.org. That's alzheimersprevention.org. And there's a new organization called Purple Table Reservations, and you can go to purpletables.com, And if you are a restaurant owner and want to train your staff, they will help you with that. They also have an app where people can find out what restaurants are trained, and this is new. So feel free to suggest this to restaurateurs. We'd love to get more and more people involved. And then again, I want to give a shout out to Tammy and Cathy with the Silver Dawn Training Institute. They do a lot with what they call introspective improv. And you can find more out about them at cdcsdementiaraw.com. And don't forget to check out alzheimersspeaks.com. We're here for you, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you. Bye now.
Hi, this is Suzanne Newman, host of the Answers for Elders podcast and radio show. We are the North Star that guides you through the complicated journey of senior care with trusted experts in money, law, living solutions, and more. So join us on this station, your favorite podcast channel, or just go to AnswersForElders.com. Meet the Wayshowers who will help your journey go a lot easier.